I recently appeared on the Ayn Rand Center UK's show, The Cutting Edge, with Lee Pearson, Bob Stubblefield, and Steve Richens. And during my appearance, we discussed my concept of two hierarchies of knowledge, which I've already given a description of in an earlier video, which I've linked in the description. But during this video, I answer questions from these gentlemen about my concept of two hierarchies of knowledge. That is the conditional hierarchy and the idea of logical inductive order, which I believe to hold two important but very separate functions in a proper theory of induction. So they all asked really good questions, and it produced a fruitful discussion, and I hope you enjoy it.
Okay, Bob, you're up.
Uh, would you call one of the hierarchies you're referring to epistemological and the other metaphysical?
Yes, that's a really good question. There's a little bit of a wrinkle here, but I'll start by agreeing. The conditional hierarchy is metaphysical. It identifies how some facts condition other facts, how they play a role in the identity of other facts. The inductive hierarchy is entirely epistemological. So, for example, if you had some aliens that didn't have eyesight, they didn't have the ability to detect light, their inductive hierarchy would look totally different from ours because they would start with different percepts and they'd have to work their way to say like the idea of atoms through some completely different inductive route than we did. Whereas the conditional hierarchy just identifies which facts play a role in which other facts. So that's a metaphysical issue.
Another clarification again. What are these points on the hierarchy? Are they concepts, principles, propositions, lies?
There is actually something I'm working on, which I call a hierarchy of rationalization. I think basically when you lie, you have to tell another lie, which conditions that lie. So you actually go up the hierarchy in a sort of evil way. And I'm toying with the idea that this is how you can understand philosophers like Kant. Is that, or how you go from understanding someone like, I don't know, like someone like Heraclitus, and then understand the evolution from someone like Heraclitus all the way to Kant is like through a process of rationalization. But anyway, yeah. So we don't include lies. We include only truths in our conditional hierarchy. And specifically, we talk about propositions, how some propositions, because concepts on their own don't identify facts. They are the vocabulary of identifying facts. So only propositions identify facts. So it's how some facts condition others. So it's the units or propositions related to one another.
Now, given any 2 points on your hierarchy, are they in opposite directions? They're always, you'll never get 1 point that is the opposite direction of, let's see, supposing A is logically prior to B. Is it always the case that B must be a fact in order for A to hold?
Tell me if this is what you're asking. Are you asking, is the conditional hierarchy always the reverse of the inductive hierarchy?
Yes, but I wanted to conclude that from the answer to this question.
Right. So the answer is many times, often, the conditional hierarchy is the reverse of the inductive hierarchy, simply because when we look in front of us, we don't see general facts, we see specific facts. And then the only reason we even need to identify general facts is so that we can predict and control new instances when we come across them.
Okay, so unless all is not an operative word here, then there's only one hierarchy. You just look at it from one direction or the other direction.
Well, it's not all, because sometimes, so I'll give an example. It's not always in reverse. So Newton induced his 3 laws of motion. Then once he had those laws in motion in hand, what he then did is he did some deductions from those laws of motion. And he actually predicted that the Earth would be not a sphere, but kind of a smushed sphere, because it's spinning, and that kind of makes it bulge out at the sides. Kind of like if you spin, your arms will do this. So that's happening with the Earth, basically. And he deduced exactly the shape the Earth should have based on how fast it's spinning. Later, and so what you could say is he induced a more specific law, the fact that spinning objects bulge at their center. He induced that generalization by deduction from a higher principle. So the inductive order doesn't always go from the narrower to the broader. Sometimes the inductive order proceeds by deduction, going from the broader to the narrower.
I have to contemplate that a little bit.
Yeah. Because that sounds like
this is part of what
on the face of it.
This is part of.
Because you're saying the inductive order is not the inductive order, it's partly deductive order, which I think is right, because I think what you're really talking about. I'm interrupting Bob here just for a second.
No, that's fine.
I think what you're calling the inductive order is actually what you really mean is the order of proof, and you think proof is inductive, except that sometimes it is deductive. Sometimes it's deductive. So, for example, just take your Euclid case. I think it was wrong for you. Well, maybe I don't remember exactly what you said, but I took you to say that Euclid's geometry is not proved deductively, and I'd say no, that's not correct. It is proved deductively along with inductive proof. There's inductive proof of the axioms, and then the theorems that follow are proved deductively. So it is a combination of the two. So a hierarchy of proof is not purely inductive, I guess, is my conclusion there.
I would not say it that way. This is a really important issue to clear. So I'm glad we touched on this. So the way I would say it is this: induction and deduction are not opposites in every respect. They are opposites in only one respect, in that deduction goes from general to specific, whereas induction goes from observation to general. And so in sort of this one sense, they're opposites. But during the process of induction, you often must make deductions as part of that process. So, for example,
but nobody's saying they're opposite. I mean, that wasn't the point. The point is that they're different.
I'm questioning.
The process is different. Maybe Bob is. The process is different. It's not that they're opposite. Yeah. It's that there's a different process, and that they're both involved in proof. I'll stop. Back to Bob. Sorry, Bob.
Well, I think of the inductive as being logically necessary, chronologically necessary. But deductive is also a version of proof, but it's a version of proof, as you point out. Given some other things, then you can deduce these things. And now a final hierarchy at any two arbitrary points, any two arbitrary truths, in some way it's all the same hierarchy, but it's just that you have to traverse it up and down in certain ways. Sometimes you can't go up until you've gone down on some details.
So
go ahead.
I have a specific example, I think, that'll address two of your points. First, that your first point is you're returning to the point, which is correct, that deduction in a sense can prove something. So like that's correct, but I have a certain view on that. The other idea is it's all the same hierarchy. It's just that you're either going up it or down it. So I'll use Euclid's Elements as an example. Since I didn't get a chance to elaborate on this during the discussion, I thought I'd tell you in post what Euclid's postulates or Euclid's axioms are and what Euclid's systematization of geometry is. What you see on the screen right now are Euclid's 5 postulates or axioms. And these are 5 particular geometric facts which Euclid ends up identifying as special. Euclid was aware of many geometric facts since the Greeks studied geometry, but Euclid made these 5 central to his treatment of geometry. And the reason is that he was able to take these facts and deduce every other known fact about geometry from these 5 facts alone. So let me concretize what these 5 are. Roman numeral 1 here is demonstrating that between 2 points, you can connect them with a straight line. So that's a fact. And to help you this fact is so basic, it's kind of hard to conceptualize. So I'll tell you what it would mean for this fact to not be true. This fact wouldn't be true if there were portals. And I'm talking about sci-fi portals, say from Rick and Morty, where you can jump into like a hole in space and then appear, just teleport to some other location. So if there were a portal between these 2 points, you wouldn't be able to draw a straight line from one to the other, since the line would go through the portal and just emerge somewhere else. Fact number 2 in Roman numeral 2 is the idea that you can extend any line as far as you'd like. So that's another fact. You can extend a line as far as you'd like. And this wouldn't be the case if we somehow ran into the edge of space. Now, I don't know if the edge of space is a real thing or if it even could be a real thing, but we've certainly never seen that. So as a result, this is one of the laws of geometry. There is no edge. You can extend a line as far as you'd like. So what Euclid does is he takes these 5 and he systematizes geometry in a conditional hierarchy by deducing all of the known facts of geometry from these 5 facts alone. So that will serve as a concretization of what we end up discussing. On one hand, I would say you can't just deduce from the axioms and say that you can't just deduce from Euclid's 5 postulates and say that you've proven the theorems. You can't do that, because how do you know the postulates are true? Yep. But then you could say, well, you just look at reality and you see that in certain contexts, those 5 postulates are true. And so there, it's inductive. You've proven the first 5 by seeing them. Then you made some deductions and proved the rest. So a deductive proof is perfectly fine. Now, I'd say 2 things. First of all, this is an inductive proof because it really does rely on observation. It's just an induction and then a bunch of deductions. But here's something else I'll say. The first 5 postulates of Euclid are not, they can be identified by observation, but if you started geometry, you'd never think to identify those 5 as being essential.
That those things are arrived at either by direct perception or by inductive reasoning from direct perception. But then you can prove, once you've arrived at that, you can then prove things by deduction.
So here's
Can I jump in? Bob, you got some more, Bob? Or?
So I'll finish my earlier point by simply saying you can't actually start inductively with Euclid's 5 postulates. You'd never think to single out those particular 5 things. If you go in an actual order of induction, then geometry has a very different order than the elements. You're going to notice things like certain facts about triangles first is the order that I actually go in. then eventually you'll accumulate this giant pile of geometric generalizations, and then you will systematize them as Euclid did, so that you can identify which one will apply in any particular case.
Yeah. I have something to say about that point after Bob is, if he's got some more stuff on.
Well, two other things.
Good.
That were in my mind a second ago.
I know how that is.
One is that history is a good clue to the inductive order. So,
yeah.
Say that once more, Bob. Sorry. Once more.
History is a good clue to the inductive order.
Okay.
The other, well, one more observation before I get to the second observation. In other words, I've got three. That the spiral theory of knowledge follows from what we can say here.
You just scooped me, Bob. You scooped me. I should have jumped in. All right, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, the other point is about if you try to mash the two hierarchies as being identical, the way you can do that is by taking any of the metaphysical prior things as being known implicitly.
Right. That's right.
In other words, nobody really knows anything implicitly, as James points out in his lecture, that you can't form an induction based on something you know implicitly, because you don't know it implicitly. To know it implicitly is not to know it. And yet implicit knowledge has a meaning to us. We know what we're talking about. So what is it that we're talking about? I have an idea. I'd like to hear you, James.
Oh yeah, so this is an important issue. So a lot of part of the basis on which the OPAR order is referred to as an inductive order is that it's an implicit order of learning. And the reason for this is that when a kid opens his eyes and identifies just things in front of him, he's identifying an instance of the law of identity, and he's treating it as though the law of identity is true. He's making identifications about it. He doesn't have words, but he sees that it's long. He sees that it's round. He's committing this to memory, and in so doing, he is relying upon the fact that things are what they are. Or actually, no, that's totally not the right way to say it. He is acting as though things are what they are. So we say that he knows it implicitly. But as you're saying, and that's a good way to put it, to know it implicitly is to know it implicitly. He cannot reason from this implicit knowledge. He can reason from only, oh, this is long, this is round, and then he can go from there and maybe discover whatever that empowers him to discover next. Now, so let's see. So you can't reason from implicit knowledge. And part of the basis of calling the OPAR order an inductive order is that it is an implicit order of learning. That's something that Peikoff talks about in Objectivism State of the Art. He says that he is writing OPAR. He gives this lecture as he's writing OPAR. He says, I'm ordering the book according to an implicit order of learning. And he does identify an implicit order of learning. It's a plausible order in which someone gathers these things implicitly. But the implicit knowledge at each stage is not used to gain the implicit knowledge at the next stage. Like when you're using knowledge of this pen to then identify whatever other knowledge comes later. You're using knowledge of like the fact that things fall, for example, to play baseball later in life. You're doing things like this. You're not using identity to then, you're not using the law of identity to then identify something else. Now you're acting as though the law of identity is true, and you're acting as though the law of causality is true. But you're not using knowledge of those things in order, those higher level principles in order to make the next step. You're using knowledge of the specifics because you're explicitly aware of the specifics. So that's how the issue of implicit knowledge comes in. And an equivocation on what implicit knowledge really means, I think, is part of what makes this part of what makes it easy to mix these two hierarchies together.
Okay, I think this is a good spot, unless Bob's still in charge as far as I'm concerned, but if I can jump in here, if that's all right, I will, because I think this is a good point.
Let me get this super chat out of the way. But Bonnie Bertrand asked,
Yes.
how is conditional hierarchy a form of rationalism? And thank you for that super chat, Bonnie.
How is it or is it? Is she asking, or is she telling us it is?
No, it's a question. How is it? There's no it. It just says, how is conditional hierarchy?
I don't know if James actually said that.
No, I don't think so. I think she's just asking a general.
Well, I can clarify something.
Go ahead. Do it.
So a conditional hierarchy is not a form of rationalism. It's an absolutely critical aspect of correct thinking. So for example, OPAR is a conditional hierarchy. Euclid's Elements is a conditional hierarchy. And these are both valid bodies of knowledge. But if you think that a conditional hierarchy constitutes the proof of an idea, then that's rationalism. That's the thing that's rational. So there's nothing wrong with conditional hierarchy as long as you're clear on what it performs. A conditional hierarchy integrates and contextualizes our knowledge. It does not prove it.
Okay, I usually like to try to simplify things if I can. I like simplification, but I'm going to try to simplify this time by first complicating things and see if that works. I don't know. But here's the thing that struck me about this. First of all, I wrote down the word and circled it, spiraling, but Bob beat me to that. So anyway, we know what spiraling is. But let's look at it more carefully. We don't want to speak. We don't want to talk as if the concepts we're talking about here that are arranged hierarchically, or the propositions, or whatever they are. Let me use concepts. Are hard little forms. They're immutable forms that changeless and are the way they are all the time. And that seems to be a lot of the talk here seems to be in that vein. What I would point out there is that as a human being develops, there are all kinds of different concepts, different levels of knowledge about the concept, often different definitions. As Ayn Rand points out, a young child will define gold as a yellow metal. But then when you get out there and you're prospecting and you pick up yellow metals, you're going to pick up a lot of fool's gold, and that won't work. You got to have a better definition. So definitions change, your knowledge of a concept changes. And that, I think, has a whole lot of implication for hierarchy.
Yes.
And by the way, not only do the concepts change, I think spiraling occurs between concepts. As one concept changes, it changes another one, and that back reacts on the first one. So that can happen. And that may be, the infamous example that McCaskey talked about of Galileo and inertia might come into play here. Galileo did, if I understand the situation, did not have a proper concept of inertia, but he knew something. And whether you call it, I don't care whether you call it implicit or explicit or well-defined or poorly defined or a red light or a green light or a purple light or a yellow, I don't care what you call it, he was able to use that to do some reasoning. And then you get to Newton, and Newton gets a more precise concept, and he's able to go further than that. So I think that complicates all of these hierarchy things considerably, because what Dr. Peikoff is talking about sometimes in OPAR, and I have to go back and reread the whole thing to be really clear about this, but sometimes he's talking about a mature a hierarchy after you've been through a whole lot of spiraling and you're a philosopher and you got that. And you have to distinguish that hierarchy from a young child or even an unsophisticated, the plain man in the street, as the philosophers say. So you have to distinguish those things. And I guess, I got to throw in one more. I could go further, but I'm going to turn it back to you, James. But I want to throw in one more thing, which I've said to you before. I hate that word condition. I just hate it. Not just because, not only because it's behaviorism. It reminds me of behaviorism. Conditioning. That's the minor reason. The major reason is it's so vague, has a role, plays a role in it. I don't like that. I would if you could shape that up and sharpen it, I would be much obliged. And I can figure out what's going on better, much better. Anyway, so for that, I just had to bring that up again. So let me turn it back.
That's an important thing to bring up. So I'll address why I use such a strange word.
That's right. Let me mention one other quick thing, just because this is just at concretization. Bob and I had an interesting discussion on Cutting Edge some time ago about rights and government and what's the proper hierarchy of rights and government. Now, from the start, I thought the answer was completely obvious. I still think it's pretty obvious. I thought it's obvious that rights come first, then comes government. And I had a simple argument, and what I think was an airtight argument. But you do have to consider this issue I just mentioned of, it's not like we have a Platonic form of government a Platonic form of rights that came down on us before the concept of the Platonic form of government fell down on us. We had some concept of right. I still think rights come first, and Bob still disagrees with me, but that's okay. We had some primitive form of rights first, and then some primitive form of government, and then it spiraled around till we got to our current. That's a good, I think, good concretization of what I'm. So I'll stop there.
So I'll cover all three. So first, let's see. Okay, the first thing you brought, these are three massive issues. So my crow blew.
We only have like 7 minutes.
Let me remind, what was the first issue again?
The first issue? Well, I said it was really the spiraling, that there are various levels of knowledge and definition.
Okay, yeah.
And concepts are not hard little Platonic forms. Yeah.
So concept, so the first one was regarding the spiral theory of knowledge, which is that as you accumulate more knowledge, you properly change your definitions and conceptualizations. So how does that work? Well, here's the deal. Basically what I'm doing here in saying all of this is I'm describing in detail how the spiral theory of knowledge works. Peikoff gives some general characteristics of the spiral theory of knowledge. What I'm doing is I'm giving the specifics, and I think I can make this. And you said you complicated it as you said you would, and now I think I can tie that into a nice bow. I think. Let's give it a shot. So, you're young. You'll learn some stuff about plants, let's say, okay? You learn some stuff about living things, okay? So you see, and you notice some living things move and some of them don't move. They're both living things, but some of them move and some of them don't move. I'm gonna call those, the ones that move, animals. I'm gonna call the ones that don't move, I'm gonna call those plants, okay? So you come across a mushroom and you say, oh, hey, another plant. That's a wacky looking plant. And a biologist says, you idiot, that's not a plant. Now, so from the kid's context of knowledge, that's totally wrong to say. The kid doesn't from the biologist's context of knowledge, it is right to say that they've made a mistake. But they need to understand that the child doesn't understand the facts which require a differentiation between mushrooms and other plants. It turns out that, mushrooms don't do photosynthesis and they don't technically have roots. They have these, I forget what they're called, these stringy things that go out and eat dead stuff something like that. So they're not roots, they're something else, flagellum, cilia, something like that, some stringy things. So, they're very much different. But from the child's context of knowledge, he's only aware of one differentiation here. Some of the living things move, some of them don't. So what the hell are you telling me a mushroom?
Can I stop you just for a second, James, on this example?
Yeah.
On this example,
yeah.
It's not clear to me why you say the biologist would say the child is wrong, because the biologist would say, I mean, I don't know if there's a technical definition for plant. You know, there are various kingdoms of various kingdoms, and there's a kingdom that includes the fungi, and there's a kingdom that includes the what we call plants. But I don't think he would object to the child saying that's a plant at the level of that's something that is planted. It doesn't walk, it doesn't move around. It's differentiation. That differentiation is not against biology or anything. It's just that there are further differentiations in science that differentiate that broad category into a number of other categories, or some number.
Yeah.
There's bacteria also.
I think that's
there's
right.
There's several categories, and well, I don't know. Let's not get technical. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's an error.
So this is
necessarily an error. Even to a biologist, I don't see why that's an error. It's just it's not a complete.
Well, the biologist would be wrong. The biologist would be wrong to say that the child is wrong. The child is right within his context of knowledge.
I would say that's true with the gold example too. The accomplished gold prospector would be wrong saying the child's definition of gold is wrong, but somehow I see that as different because there the definition changed. It's not merely a differentiate. Maybe this isn't too important for our purposes, but it's not merely a differentiation.
No, it is
the change in definition. So it's not just that the category became more differentiated, which I see as the case. It looks to me as the case with plants. It looks like there's a redefinition, and some things that were in the category are now out of the category as a result, like that. Yeah, it's like that. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
So now the way we can understand this change of definitions and this spiraling, the way we can understand this inductively is to talk about both inductive order and conditional hierarchy. So qua inductive order, the child grows up, he starts learning facts about biology. You know, if he didn't go to a progressive school, he starts learning facts about biology. And then he realizes, oh, one fact about living things, which conditions a great many other facts of those living things, is how they get their nutrients. And I can see that some plants do photosynthesis, and other plants, forgive me biologists, but other plants like fungi eat dead stuff in their surroundings with these stringy things. I forget, something like that. I didn't go to a progressive school, so I actually remember that much from my 7th grade biology class. So he understands that, and he understands that qua his inductive journey. Then qua conditioning hierarchy, he sees that because the nutrient gathering mechanism conditions a great many other facts about the way organisms are, he decides, man, I got to stop calling those plants. That needs a whole different category than other plants, the plants that do photosynthesis. I need to choose a different standard of differentiation, because the standard of differentiation of locomotion versus non-locomotion, that doesn't capture essentials. It doesn't capture a large number of other conditioning factors. So instead, I need to talk about whether they use photosynthesis or whether they use the feeding with the stringy, the fungi method of feeding.
Yeah,
I need to differentiate based on that.
Feeding on decomposing, other decomposing, formerly animate matter, whatever you call that, decomposed material. Yeah. I guess we're headed. We ought to be heading pretty soon here.
Wait, we got another super chat from Joey. From Joey, who we met at the conference, Joey Queso.
Yeah.
I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right. He says Rand's understanding versus versus grasp may help in this. Those are, let me read it again. Rand's.
Yeah, one word.
Versus Greg's.
No, this is Joey Casso's super chat.
Yeah.
It-
Yeah.
but
Okay.
it- Sorry,
What does he say?
it's a comment because there's no question mark.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the concepts understand. Yeah, the concepts understanding and grasp.
Oh,
And-
understanding
Oh.
versus grasp. So that
Yes.
I'm not sure. I kind of get what he's getting at there, but I'm not sure whether the distinction is always the same distinction. As a grasp, understanding would seem to imply something conceptual, and a grasp might not. And that you might grasp something without having a full understanding. And I think we could agree. I think we'd agree with that. If that's what he's getting at, I think that would be agreeable. Bob looks like he wants to.
Well, if grasp is taken, I can differentiate this from that. And understanding says, well, understanding is something that clearly grows by time. You understand more and more. So
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So that may be helpful again in the understanding what goes on in the spiraling process. Is that if you start with a grasp and proceed to an understanding and proceed from there to a deeper understanding, that may be of some value. By the way, I should mention before I forget, we've just gotten to this issue of hierarchy. I'm not sure we've disposed of it by any means, but anyway, that means we have to go on next time. James, you're going to have to come back in a couple of weeks to do the next, to actually talk about induction per se, and maybe we can say a few more things about hierarchy, because I don't think we've wrapped that up. But we can't wrap it up now, but we can. But thank everybody for coming, and we can all go over to Clubhouse. We can do that. Are we ready?
Sounds good.
Joey, join us on Clubhouse.
Yeah.
I
And
think you will.
you're going to go over there, aren't you, James?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll go over to Clubhouse, and we'll let if the people want to, we'll let James hold forth on people's questions first, and then take it from there. Okay.
Good.
Thanks
for
a
having
lot.
me. See y'all on
We'll
Clubhouse.
see you next time.